Welcome to the reading of the Journal of Sojourner Truth. My name is Dr. Lita Hooper, and I'm an English faculty over at the Decatur campus. This collection of poems came out of a grant I received from the City of Atlanta for the Emerging Artist Grant, and it is a chronicling of Sojourner Truth's life as told to us, her readers, through her slave narrative. So what I've done is I've taken the narrative, and you'll hear excerpts from the narrative, and then you'll hear a poetic response to those excerpts. The grant was an amazing opportunity for me because I'd always wondered, when you have slave narratives that are as told to, because Sojourner Truth was illiterate, what was missing? What do we not get to hear? Because these are still as told to someone else. So Olive Gilbert, who wrote Sojourner Truth's narrative, with all good intentions, I'm sure, could not capture some moments that I thought were very critical. So these poems reflect those moments. A couple of things you're going to hear Sojourner Truth referred to as Isabella, which was her birth name. She changed her name later in her life to Sojourner Truth. You'll hear her father's name, Bomfrey, and you'll hear her mother referred to as Mau Mau or Mau Mau Bet. Okay, and so we'll get started. The Journal of Sojourner Truth.
In the final analysis, the narrative of Sojourner Truth must be evaluated more for what it says than for what it leaves unsaid. By dictating her slave narrative, working for the abolition of bondage, being an outspoken friend and critic of women's rights, and fighting a lonely crusade for African American self-determination, Sojourner Truth wrote herself into history. Introduction.
Many have told my story, sculpted my tenor as easily as pen stains the page. But what I offer here is a life of constant revision. God, my greatest editor. Read this with open hearts, and you will come to know not how I lived, but how to become glorious. Women slaves, all take these poems as my offering. Glory, glory, all around us, blessings unfolded.
Among Isabella's earliest recollections was the removal of her master, Charles Ardenberg, into his new house, which he had built for a hotel soon after the decease of his father. A cellar under this hotel was assigned to his slaves as their sleeping apartment. All the slaves he possessed, of both sexes sleeping, as is quite common in the state of slavery, in the same room. She shudders even now as she goes back in memory and revisits this cellar.
Sleeping quarters.
Here, our misery unfolds, hovers, the way the air weighs one down to sleep. We lay in quiet gratitude on a thin wood and straw pellet, our breathing a testimony to another day's survival. Flanked by Bomfrey and Mama, I hold a patient pose as nice sounds remind me of life's abundance. I search. In the darkened room, which is like a sky, spotted by the moon's mercy. Before I close my eyes, I follow God's direction. A silver streak breaking through the pain, pointing.
Isabella's father was very tall and straight when young, which gave him the name Bomfrey, Low Dutch for tree. The most familiar appellation of her mother was Mama Bet. She was the mother of some 10 or 12 children. She was privileged to behold 6 of them while she remained a slave.
Isabella wishes that all who feign to believe that slave parents had not natural affection for their offspring could have listened as she did, while Bomfrey and Mama Bet would sit for hours recalling and recounting every endearing as well as harrowing circumstances that taxed their memory could supply. From histories of those dear departed ones of whom they had been robbed and for whom their hearts still bled. Mama Bet remembered.
Bomfrey, I shall not be denied the memory of my children, their touch, smell, smiles, yes, but not what I've stored, what I know without thinking on.
What is it, Beth?
That the Lord's mercy resides in Peter's brown eyes. There's healing power in my young one's tears. Only angel songs rival the beauty of my girl's laughter.
They're gone, Beth. How could we know?
The last one, Isabella, see how good he is, bomb-free.
My children, there is a God who hears and sees you. A God, Mama? Where does he live? Asked the children. He lives in the sky, she replied. And when you are beaten or cruelly treated or fall into any trouble, you must ask help of him, and he will always hear and help you.
What I learned of God.
In the morning, under the sparkling vault of heaven, Mama Beck would call us, talk to us of God's mercy. I listened carefully, understood that only God hears all, sees all, expects praise like a lowly beast devours fear. Enough ails me, she'd say, bent in prayer. My siblings' recitations always brief. Years later, I bowed beneath the gleaming night sky, faithful, fierce, unwavering.
In the evening, when her mother's work was done, she would sit down under the sparkling vault of heaven, and calling her children to her, would talk to them of the only being that could effectually aid or protect them. Ma quilting.
I remember Ma quilting when the day gave way to whispers and fatigue, when warmth of bodies in our small home was just enough. I followed her hands, read the histories and each weft she wrote as if crafting a universal prayer. One night, I sat at the hem of the scroll cloth telling a text no child could comprehend. In from the field, bomb-free treaded across like an angry soldier, the quilt, his battlefield of shame and loss. I still recall the dirt of his heel, staining one corner of my old calico dress.
At length, the never-to-be-forgotten day of the terrible auction arrived, when the slaves, horses, and other cattle of Charles Artenberg, deceased, were to be put under the hammer and again change masters. Not only Isabella and Peter, her brother, but their mother was now destined to the auction block.
Auction! $100 is just enough to buy a slave girl, 9 or 10 years old. She will not resist. Bid high, higher. Tell the world of your sin. Watch her stand there atop warped planks beneath warning signs. How much for the one with the small eyes? Pinch her firm flesh. Tug at the nape. Offer up currency for virgin blood. Dream, sacrifice to ward off our sins.
Blind and crippled, bomb-free, was too superannuated to think for a moment of taking care of himself, and he greatly feared no persons would interest themselves in his behalf. While he was living this way, Isabella was twice permitted to visit him. Another time, she walked 12 miles and carried her infant in her arms to see him. But when she reached the place where she hoped to find him, he had just left for a place some 20 miles distant, and she never saw him more.
Bunfrey's last testimony.
They say freedom only come on paper, penned and declared. I say it come like the rain when you need it most, when we can no longer stand the drought, when too much life is taken. Isabella never complained, worked hard as her brothers, birthed babies to her master's satisfaction. If she sought love, I wouldn't know it. Last time I saw her, there was thunder in her voice, the kind some tend to ignore before the furious tide takes them.
Bumfrey found his poor needs hardly supplied, as his new providers were scarcely able to administer to their own wants. One day, an ace-colored woman named Soane called at his shanty. He was suffering dreadfully with the filth and vermin that had collected upon him.
Soane was herself an emancipated slave, old and weak. She lacked the courage to undertake a job of such a seeming magnitude, and with great reluctance and a heart swelling with pity, she felt obliged to leave him in his wretchedness and filth. And shortly after her visit, this faithful slave, this deserted wreck of humanity, was found on his miserable pallet, frozen and stiff in death.
Death of Bumfrey.
What becomes of a useless slave when the casualties of labor warp the mind and gait, when the memory of lashings lingers in the flesh, sinew, bone? What happens to those used ones? Beneath most any tree, one finds the fallen fruit, or leaves that quit the strapping branch. To loyal shorelines, the ocean offers up shells, stilled but not silent. Bumfrey waited in a rude cabin in a lone wood, blind and frozen and stiff in death, for a friend or daughter, all used up and useless, but to his true master.
During the winter months, her feet were badly frozen for want of proper covering. They gave Isabella plenty to eat and also plenty of whipping. One Sunday morning in particular, she was told to go to the barn. On going there, she found her master with a bundle of rods prepared in the embers and bound together with cords.
He whipped her till the flesh was deeply lacerated and the blood streamed from her wounds, and the scars remain to the present day to testify to the fact. In these hours of her extremity, she did forget the instructions of her mother to go to God in all her trials and every affliction. In the barn.
One sudden morning, he stormed about, anger streaming like the sweat on a poor man's brow, twisting wrists, assaulting air. He pinned me to the barn wall as if for slaughter. It was Sunday. The Lord awaited praise, but my soul was filled with survival. Still, I refused to scream out for my master, muted the mercy cry with every lashing. Later, under soft, dark sky, I stared at my palm flesh, now pierced from my own grip. I clasped wet hands, determined.
She had no idea God had any knowledge of her thoughts, save what she told him, or heard her prayers unless they were spoken audibly. And consequently, she could not pray unless she had time and opportunity to go by herself where she could talk to God without being overheard.
Faithful.
From earthly doubts, I scaled the fragile scaffold. Jesus approved, but I, in disbelief, knew him not, only moved by the tears and prayers of others. I stepped lightly toward what I could not name, ambitious for the heaven prize. Then glory! I stood with him, this known one, so much more than my imagination could offer.
Mrs. Dumont, who had been born and educated in a non-slaveholding family and, like many others, used only to work people who, under the most stimulating of human motives, were willing to put forth their every energy, could not have patience with the creeping gait, the dull understanding, or see any cause for the listless manners and careless, slovenly habits of the poor, downtrodden outcasts.
At the stove.
This morning, Steam ascends from bubbling pot. I close my eyes, spoon submerged. Remember, a childhood dream. My eyes open. I see fresh wounds on each hand. Some caused an accident, others caught by surprise, all soothed by the warmth of the broth. How this old black skin glistens from laud and early sun. Mrs. Dumont strolled through the kitchen. All she sees is a good profit.
As Isabella advanced in years, an attachment sprung up between herself and a slave named Robert. But his master, an Englishman by the name of Catalan, anxious not no one's profit but his own should be enhanced by the increase of his slave, forbade Robert's visits to Isabella, and commanded him to take a wife among his fellow servants.
One Saturday afternoon, hearing that Belle was ill, he took the liberty to go and see her. Robert made his appearance, and the first people he met were his old and his young masters. They both fell upon him like tigers, beating him with the heavy ends of their canes, bruising and mangling his head and face in the most awful manner, and causing the blood which streamed from his wounds to cover him like a slaughtered beast.
This beating, as we know not what after treatment completely subdued the spirit of its victim, for Robert ventured no more to visit Isabella, but like an obedient and faithful chattel, took himself a wife from the house of his master.
Robert answered,
I took a beating for Belle, not because I loved her, or wanted to prove all that I whispered in her ear each stolen night. Sometimes the silence in her eyes swallowed me like pride denied. But I learned to tread up, return to stale southern air, chance the distance from farm to farm, bear my sins in her ever-welcome arms. I went down that day beneath white fists to answer my daddy years before as he waited for death. Will you be a man or a slave?
And if anyone talked to Isabella of the injustice of her being a slave, she answered them with contempt and immediately told her master. She then firmly believed that slavery was right and honorable. Yet she now sees very clearly the false position they were all in, both masters and slaves.
Her sorrow.
a slave woman I once knew birthed 7 children. Name them all. Sometimes we can hear her calling each one across the fields, the rivers, beyond the daily wells, laughter. You can hear her. Each name precise as air. Every now and then, an answer. In the process of time, Isabella found herself the mother of 5 children, and she rejoiced in being permitted to be the instrument of increasing the property of her oppressors. Think, dear reader, without a blush, if you can, for one moment, of a mother that is thus willingly and with pride laying her own children, the flesh of her flesh, on the altar of slavery.
But we must remember that beings capable of such sacrifices are not mothers. They are only things, chattel, property. With child at the well.
The morning of the day I bore my 5th child, I stood at the edge of the well, tears, dark peace tempting. I thought I saw the face of my Lord, rippling just like the fine, curious limbs within me. as I leaned in to soothe my Savior's face. I think I may have spilled the blood of my master, who knew not the wisdom of Jesus, but praised instead the glory of prophet.
After emancipation had been decreed by the state, some years before the time fixed for its consummation, Isabella's master told her if she would do well and be faithful, he would give her free papers, 1 year before she was legally free by statute. In the year 1826, she had a badly diseased hand, which greatly diminished her usefulness. But on the arrival of July 4, 1827, the time specified for her receiving her free papers, her master refused granting it, on account, as he had alleged, of the loss he had sustained by her hand. But Isabella inwardly determined that she would remain quietly with him only until she had spun his wool, and then she would leave him.
My freedom.
To say I ran away would be untrue. I walked. My freedom granted, then denied. I bundled children, clothes, and fear, and waited till dawn. Then followed prayer's direction, each step confirmed. I gained the summit of a high hill, paused for my own courage, my grip lightened by fatigue, my faith reflected in the offensive sun. That morning, I became an answer to a question my master dare not ask.
There was Charles Broadhead promised his slave Ned that when harvesting was over, he might go and see his wife who lived some 20 or 30 miles off. So Ned worked early and late, and as soon as the harvest was all in, he claimed the promised boon. His master said he had merely told him he would see if he could go when the harvest was over. But now he saw that he could not go. But Ned, who still claimed a positive promise on which he had fully depended, went on cleaning his shoes. His master asked him if he intended going, and on his replying yes, took up a sled stick that lay near him and gave Ned such a blow on the head as broke his skull, killing him dead on the spot.
Oh, my goodness. Alive.
A tongue should not bear the memory of blood, the tangy sweetness of flesh torn, the ancestral river disturbed. The old ones know lashing still like a searing cry ignored. But this is not a sound to rejoice. Still, even I admit the subtle satisfaction from the warm trickle, bruises reverberating like drums announcing bloated skins, the color of late summer plums. How tenderly the living remains.
A little previous to Isabel's leaving her old master, he had sold her child, a boy of 5 years, to a Dr. Getney, who took him with him as far as New York City on his way to England. But finding the boy too small for his service, he sent him back to his brother, Solomon Getney. This man disposed of him to his sister's husband, a wealthy planter by the name of Fowler, who took him to his own home in Alabama.
The law expressly prohibited the sale of any slave out of the state, and all minors were to be free at 21 years of age. When Isabella heard that her son had been sold south, she immediately started on foot and alone to find the man who had thus dared, in the face of all law, human and divine, to sell her child out of the state, and if possible, to bring him to account for the deed.
Finding Peter.
When they sold my Peter out of state, they broke their own laws. Grand jurors, legislators, constables, all servants of the court, failed their own corruption, denied me a mother's pride. The day I demanded the return of my son, my words quivered, then grew big with contempt each syllable gaining courage, my heartache relieved. When the judge told me that I was his only master, my Peter cast down his eyes, as did I.
When the pleading was at an end, Isabella understood the judge to declare as the sentence of the court that the boy be delivered into the hands of the mother. This sentence was obeyed. He was delivered into her hands. The boy, meanwhile, begging most piteously not to be taken from his dear master, saying she was not his mother and that his mother did not live in such a place as that.
They succeeded in convincing him that Isabella was not some terrible monster, as he had for months probably been trained to believe, and who, in taking him away from his master, was taking him away from all good and consigning him to all evil.
Peter's lament.
They say she is my mother. What am I to do with a mother? I have my fine master, the sea, and food. I have no need for mother love. Inside that house she waits, but how can I care for someone who's worth less than my good shoes? From ship to shore I've been recaptured to surrender my birth. No currency to speak of, just inherited agony. Pulling me to the ranks I have come to despise.
Then a space seemed to be opening between her and God, and she felt that if someone who was worthy in the sight of heaven would then but plead for her in their own name and not let God know it came from her, who was so unworthy, God might grant it. At length, a friend appeared to stand between herself and an insulted deity.
Who are you?
She exclaimed, as the vision brightened into a form distinct, beaming with beauty of holiness and radiant with love.
I know you, and I don't know you.
At length, after bending both soul and body with intensity of this desire, an answer came to her, saying distinctly,
It is Jesus.
She responded,
Yes, it is Jesus.
Friend,
in the space between God and me came Jesus. Light blossoming fragrance as dawn emerges after a turbulent eve, familiar as my previous condemnation.
This friend, this open hand led me to what I'd long forgotten. When Mama Bet whispered bedtime prayers while round us skulks a shifting shadow, Master outside the door, his prowling loud as a moon's glimmer.
Jesus, who stands between me as I advance toward God, once dreaded King, now my patient friend.
How can I fear the shadow now? Sweet peace, my blessed protector.
while Isabella was in New York, her sister Sophia came from Newburgh to reside in the former place. Isabel had been favored with occasional interviews with this sister, although at one time she lost sight of her for the space of 17 years. And when she appeared before her again, handsomely dressed, she did not recognize her, till informed who she was. Sophia informed her that her brother Michael, a brother she had never seen, was in the city. And when she introduced him to Isabella, he informed her that their sister Nancy had been living in the city and had deceased a few months before.
Oh, Lord,
Inquired Isabella.
what is this slavery that it can do such dreadful things? What evil can it not do? A sister's dream.
I'll see them again. Brothers and sisters all. Landscapes and laws can't replace the memory of blood. Yesterday, the market was heavy. Folks coming from ships, farms, moved by necessity and loneliness. I sat on the edge of a warped crate, catching each passing eye, reading lineage like I know one quilt pattern from another. If Belle passed, her eyes were most likely heaven cast.
Isabella's next decision was that she must leave the city. It was no place for her. Yes, she felt called in spirit to leave it and to travel east and lecture. Having made what preparations she deemed necessary, about an hour before she left, she informed Miss Whiting, a woman of whom the house she were to be stopping at, that her name would no longer be Isabella, but Sojourner, and that she was going east. And to her inquiry,
"What are you going east for?"
her answer was,
"The Spirit calls me there, and I must go."
Landscape.
Beyond that bend lies bountiful hope. Sanctioned dangers lurk, but I will not be paused by faith refused. I keep pace on lonesome roads, stare down the cowardly pack patrolling. Ghost men hide, watch me quick step march to hymnal jubilance. Follow, children, my journey, your inheritance.
Isabella was now fairly stated on her pilgrimage, her bundle in one hand and a little basket of provisions in the other, and 2 York shillings in her purse. Her heart strong in the faith that her true work lay before her, and that the Lord was her director. She walked on, the stars and the tiny horns of the new moon shed but a dim light on her lonely way.
Testimony. 1.
In the season of death, brown bodies fed white fear.
2.
in the clearing of thin, dark scenes, still against the late autumn breeze, the dangling form of a familiar posture to those who dare roam southern black woods. I, as I neared the telling stench, forewarned beneath the splendor sun, I bowed head, hands clasped, eyes testifying.
3.
I pray for good dreams, those that end with a smile, music. When I've worked all day for my master, I ask only for nocturnal peace, to be like the moon, innocent of the sun's sin.
When she had convinced the people that she was a lover of God and his cause and had gained a good standing with them so that she could get a hearing among them, she had become quite sure in her own mind that they were laboring under a disillusion, and she was condemned to use her influence to calm the fears of people and pour oil upon their troubled waters.
Speak, speak.
He said, I did. And they listened. Black, white, man, woman, even child.
Birds know wicked winds from heaven breath, guiding light their timely flight.
Speak, speak, praise beyond bruised heart, sanctioned wealth of Christian land, life consumed, then denied.
Children follow water, know the current like a mother's blood, baptismal bound.
Dark intent, even loyal heart, silenced by faithful sacrifice. Glory abound. Hear the deliverance song. Sing, sing.
It won't be long.
A party of wild young men with no motive but that of entertaining themselves by annoying and injuring the feelings of others had assembled at the meeting, hooting and yelling and in various ways interrupting the services. Sojourner found herself quaking with fear, and under the impulse of this sudden emotion, she fled to the most retired corner of a tent and secreted herself behind a trunk. She began to soliloquize as follows.
Shall I run away and hide from the devil, me, a servant of the living God? Have I not faith enough to go out and quell that mob? When I know it is written, one shall chase 1,000, two shall put 10,000 to flight.
Sojourner left the tent alone and unaided, and walking some 30 rods to the top of a small rise of ground, commenced to sing.
Battle.
Sometimes I think my soul's a battleground, a fight that's become me charged by trudging warriors, careless for the cause. I remind myself to welcome beauty, song, solace, just as blades of grass aim heaven bound. I preach toward the possibility of what I know. Some nights I cry, giving ancestral blessings to the babies and men and women I am charged to free. Don't be alarmed if today I rest. My armor's dull, but sturdy.
In the spring of 1849, Sojourner made a visit to her eldest daughter, Diana, who has ever suffered from ill health and remained with Mr. Dumont, Isabella's humane master. She found him still living, though advanced in age and reduced in property, but greatly enlightened on the subject of slavery. He said he could then see that slavery was the wickedest thing in the world, the greatest curse the earth had ever felt.
She received a letter from her daughter Diana dated Hyde Park, December 19, 1849, which informed her that Mr. Dumont had gone west with some of his sons, and that he had taken along with him, probably by mistake, a few articles of furniture that she had left with him. She recalls the lectures he used to give his slaves on speaking the truth and being honest, when he was stealing all the time himself and did not even know it.
What a confession for a slave master to make to a slave.
To the slave master and his confession.
Still the body, not the soul. And you are still guilty in the eyes of the Lord. Law may absorb you, but your heart, which beats with the blood of Jesus.
Discern your sins, prepare each one before you go before the Lord. Make good your delayed promises, pay all earthly debts, then pray for timely redemption.
Yours is not the only sin this peculiar institution has wrought. Surely you are not alone in this scandal. Mistresses and brethren alike must account.
But alone you'll stand, without jurisdiction, friend or slave to shield the wrath
But
designed
alone
by
you'll
your
stand
own
without
deed.
jurisdiction, friend or slave
But alone
to shield
you'll stand
the
without
wrath designed
jurisdiction,
by your own
friend
deeds.
or slave
But
to
alone
shield the
you'll
wrath
stand
designed by
without
your own
jurisdiction,
deeds.
But alone
friend
you'll
or
stand
slave
without
to shield
jurisdiction,
the wrath
friend or
designed
slave
But
to
alone
shield
you'll stand
the wrath
without
designed
jurisdiction,
by your own
friend or
deeds.
slave to shield the wrath designed by your own deeds.
Patience, your soul conciliation.
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 Patience, your soul